Welcome back to episode 2 of Inside Badger Hoops. It's been a while. We had all Christmas break gone. I'm Ira Bowman. This is Justice Rockhill, goes by JC. It was an eventful December for the men's team and a good and not so good January so far, starting conference play for the women's team as we'll get into it. We're got some huge games to talk about on the men's side. They jumped up to number 1 in the nation on the NJCAA rankings after the big win at Indian Hills. And JC, we'll start off with that. Yeah. They go into that game ranked 3rd in the country. Indian Hills was 5 on the road at Indian Hills, and the Badgers won 93-88 in a phenomenal game.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was just basically a battle the entire game, partner. I mean, 51-36, so there was a little bit of a gap for Snow right here. But Indian Hills were able to pull together in the second half, make a bit of a mini comeback. They outscored the Badgers by 10, 52-42. But I think all around, when you look at that performance from both teams, it was just consistent and very impactful.
That's
the whole time.
That's the first half and second half point differentials right there you're
definitely
talking about. Yeah. So it was a phenomenal game to watch. Isaac Garrett had a monster performance, 29 points, 11 rebounds, and probably the best game he's played in a Badger uniform against a quality opponent.
Yeah, definitely, and also on the road as well.
Yes.
I think we got to talk about how impressive that is, because when you're on the road, travel fatigue becomes a factor for a lot of players, but not in Isaac Garrett's case. You know, he's been a consistent player throughout the season. We've seen him steadily improve a little bit. I think he was a little shell-shocked at the start of the season, but now seeing how much he's improved, I think he's no doubt the best player on this team.
And he's got him along with a good number of other players on this Snow College team. A lot of them have Division I offers, and Isaac Garrett I might have the most.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that number tallied up, but every time I see it on Instagram, he's got another one. It feels like almost every other couple of weeks.
So it's getting up there.
Yeah, he's getting up there in offers is Isaac Garrett, and then he had a phenomenal performance in the second game against. In a win over a Lake Region College team. The final score was 115-58, so not a close game. But that's what happened with the men's Badger team in the month of December. It was a great month, and then after that win over number 5 Indian Hills, they jumped up to number 1 and have stayed there since then. Actually, I don't think they've updated the polls when I checked this morning, so they haven't put out the first January poll yet. But if Badgers don't fall this week, I expect them to just stay at the number 1 spot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Snow College, when you're at that number 1 ranking, you want to defend that with all your might. Especially when it's the home game, you're the number 1 team. You want to defend your house especially, and that's what you got upcoming on this schedule. You got a home game, obviously, and I think for the Badgers, they're definitely going to want to come out hot, take as many shots as they can, try to get an early lead and really just kill the momentum of their opponents.
Yeah, and that's the way they've been doing it in that Indian Hills game you talked about, up at 16 or 18 at halftime,
mm-hmm.
and then Indian Hills outscored them in the second half. And how that was done, when I watched that game and you look at the box score, Badgers had 1 turnover at halftime at Indian Hills and finished the game with 16.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side for Indian Hills, it was pretty much the exact opposite. Indian Hills, I believe, had 14 or 15 turnovers in the first half, and the Badgers were getting a lot of points off of those turnovers, and that's what led to that 18-point lead. And then in the second half, Indian Hills only had 1 turnover, and that's what allowed them to claw back into that game and make it close.
Yeah, definitely. And the credit goes to the coaching staff of Indian Hills, no doubt, telling the players that addressing the main issue. You're turning the ball over constantly. And the Badgers, they're not a team that you want to turn the ball over against. You mentioned it yourself. They have the ability to score off a majority of those turnovers. So Indian Hills, they identified the problem that they had and neutralized it. Were able to outscore the Badgers in that second half. But at the end of the day, I think the Badgers, that lead that they had in the first half, it was just too big of a hole to climb out of.
Yeah, I completely agree. Isaac Finlinson also had a good game against Indian Hills on the road. He's been the Badgers' leading scorer all year, and against Lake Region, he had 21. So both him and Garrett had double-doubles against Lake Region in a 115-58 win, and where they pretty much only played the first, what would be 3 quarters if men's college basketball played 3 quarters.
Yeah.
It's so weird. I won't get into that, but yeah, it's weird. And then Fast forward, that was at the beginning of break, right? That was right at the beginning of our break, and even though there weren't students at Indian Hills, it was still a packed gym when I watched that broadcast. So now you fast forward through December, play at Salt Lake Community College to start conference play, who was number 4 in the country, and then play at Colorado Northwestern. Badgers get a very close marginal win, 77-76 over the Bruins in Salt Lake, and a fun game to watch. Finlayson had 10-10 in the game-winning free throw there late in the end, and then at Colorado Northwestern, 79-65 and 27 points and 7 rebounds for Finlayson. And you take what you will with those two games.
I mean, when you talk about a 77-76 win, that tells you that's down to wire. Obviously, you send the game winner, so it's a down-to-the-wire game. But looking at this box score right here, I mean, I think I got to give a lot of credit to the Badgers. They were down 48-36 at that half. So that tells me that Coach Andrew May finally told his players that, look, this is our conference rival, basically. We're going to see them later in this new year, and it's a new year, so I think it's going to be a new Badgers going against Salt Lake Community College. So I'm expecting them to be red hot, but also play a lot smarter as well. Yeah,
and you mentioned playing them again. Now that the conference has had, the Scenic West Athletic Conference has had a little bit of realignment, it will play Salt Lake 3 times, twice at their place and once here. And then with CSI in North Idaho, it's the opposite. The Idaho schools will come here twice and we'll go there once, which I think plays to Snow's benefit a lot in terms of scheduling and travel and everything there.
Yeah.
And then as we move along here, the Kings of the Court. So we're going to split this into, we're just going to do co-Kings because Garrett had monster performances in December, and Garrett was the Scenic West Athletic Conference Player of the Week that week at Indian Hills, and then Finlayson is Scenic West Athletic Conference Player of the Week this week after a strong performance at Colorado Northwestern.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to open it up with Isaac Garrett. Obviously, I talked about how dynamic he's been and how I personally think he's the best player on this team right now. When I look at this Indian Hills game, we mentioned that 29 points, but he was also very effective with those rebounds, those 11 rebounds, 6 of which coming off of defensively and 6 defensively and 5 offensively, So that tells me that his motors is constantly going in every game, and he played 30 minutes as well. So that tells me that he's got a lot of stamina as well, and he's really playing smart. Like we saw him earlier in the year, I think he was a little too physical, resulting in a lot of fouls. So I think he's really cleaned up, and he's become a lot smarter and a lot better player.
And that's an improvement from last year, because he had a lot of foul trouble games last year just by playing a little too aggressive on defense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's with the conference play coming up here. I think it's really going to benefit the team as a whole. And the coaching staff know that he's the guy to rely on when it comes to the clutch moments.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And right there with him is the other Isaac on the team, is Finlayson, averaging 17 a game. He had 27 at Colorado Northwestern. I mean, he started taking the Colorado Northwestern one-on-one kind of right in the middle of that second half when it was a 5 to 6 point game. That game was, I mean, all credit to Colorado Northwestern. They weren't a very good team last year. Number 1 team in the country goes into their place, and I mean, it's not even a blowout. Like if this year's Snow College team had played last year's Colorado Northwestern team, it would probably be like a 50-point win or close to. But the improvement from that team this year, especially defensively, was really surprising to me. I'm thoroughly impressed and really enjoyed watching that game. It was very competitive. The Badgers were only up 5 or 6 at halftime, and Finlayson was able to drop 27, most of it coming in that second half, playing really well and just took control of that game. And that's why he's our other king of the court.
Yeah, no doubt. I think Finlayson, in terms of his shooting ability, it really hasn't taken a step back. In terms of three-point shooting, though, it has taken a step back. In that game against Colorado Northwestern, he was only 1 for 3 from the three-point line, so I think he's really going to try and improve that, get back to where he was last year. But from the field, he was sensational, 10 for 13, and of course he went 6 for 6 from the free throw line, which was a struggle for the Badgers last year, so I think he is beyond improved from the already high stakes that he set last year.
Yeah, and I mean, he was the Badgers' leading scorer last year as a redshirt freshman. This year as a redshirt sophomore, also has a good number of Division I offers. And he's been phenomenal to watch this year. I think, in my opinion, he might be the best player on the team. So you and I can go back and forth on that. But both Isaacs, regardless, are pivotal parts to this men's Badgers team. And we can go ahead and move on over to the women's side of things. And they didn't play any games in December after our first episode. We did that episode. We talked about their horrific loss at home to Western Nebraska.
Which was their first loss at home.
Excuse me, not Nebraska, Western Wyoming.
Yeah.
And it was a really rough game. It was really weird to watch. And then they go in and play Salt Lake this past Thursday at Salt Lake, who is a nationally ranked team. And it was kind of a lot of the same from what I saw in that Western Wyoming game.
Yeah, just no flow on offense, defense, just struggled with communication, knowing where the ball was, knowing who the top threats that Salt Lake Community College had. So I think, it was just an all-around struggle for them. And the results just say it for itself. I mean, 84-52, you can't have that.
Yeah, Badgers lose 84-52, just like you said. And it wasn't close at all. I believe Salt Lake got out to an early 8-0 lead. Elliott scored, and then it was just kind of Salt Lake just casually growing and growing a larger lead throughout the rest of the game. It got away from the Badgers early, and they weren't ever able to come back. Yeah,
basically. I mean, to Snow's credit, they did improve steadily throughout the game. You saw the points go up in each quarter. But regardless, though, Salt Lake Community College, they were out for blood. You can see they had 19 points in the first quarter, 19 in the second quarter, then 24 in the third quarter, and then a final 22 points in the fourth quarter to truly put it away. So I do give Salt Lake Community College credit. They came out looking to dominate, and that's exactly what they did. So I think for the Badgers, they definitely got to watch their film, definitely realize who the top threats are, and not come out flat-footed like they did this last time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And my first impression of the Salt Lake game, when I turned it on to watch the replay the other day, was Snow College, Coach Zoo's team was just outmatched at every single position in size and length. And outside of probably Elliott and Hosino and Tuipulotu, they were outmatched athletically on the court and skill-wise as well. And it really, really showed early in that game.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how important practice is. I think obviously coming back from a break like we've had recently, obviously the players are going to be a little fatigued and everything. They're going to come out a little short in practice, but you expect that practice to accelerate as the days go on. And I'm wondering what happened with the Badgers during practice that resulted in this. Salt Lake Community College just absolutely dominated, like you said, athletically, physically, and size-wise. Those height and length differentials definitely played a part in that. But I think the important aspect of that is the skill level as well. So I think for the Badgers in this upcoming practices, they definitely need to work on their skill a lot more to be more well prepared for a team that the Bruins are going to bring.
Yeah, and I mean, I've watched a lot of Coach Zoo's practices setting up for games in the Crow's Nest and her practices are always run really well. They always do a really good job. Coach Zoo even brings in a bunch of Snow College male students to play against our girls team so that they can have practice against taller, stronger, faster opponents. And I think that's helped them and benefited them. But when you're resting all of December, I think that was what did it in this game, not as so much of the practice part.
Yeah.
And then the second game, Colorado Northwestern, I mean, it was like almost the scores flip-flopped. Badgers lose 80 and then 80-something to 50-something and then win 89-53 at Colorado Northwestern. And phenomenal performance from Badgers behind the arc. I started watching that game, and that was probably one of the first things that jumped out to me was how well we shot from the three.
Yep, I mean, frankly, it's more or less a frustration game. You want to take that out. So I definitely think the Badgers were frustrated with their recent performance against the Bruins, so they took out that frustration. Fortunately, went against Colorado Northwestern. But yeah, an all-around great performance. Shot well from the three, like you said. They were 11 from 28, if I'm not mistaken, from the three-point line. And just dynamic performance all around. Each player contributed, I think, really well, really accepted their roles, and really came out with some fire. And that's what you want come this conference play.
Yeah, I could 100% agree there. And then Malia Elliott had two really good games against Salt Lake and then against Colorado Northwestern this past week. That's why she's our Badger Queen of the court, 18 points per game, 4.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds. Between those two games, she had 21.7 rebounds and 3 assists at Colorado Northwestern, and probably shot the best from the field and from 3 that I've ever seen.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, 3 from 5 from the three-point line. Obviously, that's as incredible as it gets, but I was really impressed with her ability to finish the shots from the field, 8 from 11 from there, and it just shows that she's a player that's going to play consistently throughout the game. She's not going to quit whatsoever. So, yeah, no doubt a great performance, 21 points, 3 rebounds, 7 assists as well, which means that she's a team player as well. So I think she's no doubt the best player on this team.
Yeah, and there was a stretch in this game where the Badgers went on a 22-0 run between the last, I believe, 2 minutes of the second quarter and the first 4.5-ish minutes of the third quarter that really stretched this lead out, and that's what it just kind of ballooned the scoreboard there. And Malia Elliott hitting threes, Brooke Pennington hit 2 threes on back-to-back possessions, or it was one possession, and then, you know, in 2 threes in 3 possessions, that's what I'm trying to say. And then Hosino hit a 3 as well, Hawaii Rongi hit a 3 in that stretch, and it was should be a huge confidence booster going forward to this Thursday.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you talk about those big shots that we talk about, but I think when it comes to consistency of making those big shots, those threes in particular throughout the game, it tells your opponent that they got to cover the perimeter a lot more, and that means that you have more opportunities in the paint and pull away with some nice easy 2s.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it was really good to see a lot better defense against Colorado Northwestern than it was against Salt Lake. Obviously, it's not the same caliber of player at CNCC that it is at Salt Lake, but regardless, I saw improvement there.
I mean, the Badgers forced 29 turnovers on the part of, Colorado Northwestern, and they also had 13 steals, if I'm not mistaken. That was led by Hawaii Rongi, who is the defensive all-star of this team, no doubt.
Who's not surprised?
She had 4 steals in that game, and 15 points.
That's a medium for her.
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to what she's capable of, I mean, that's a pretty below average performance. She's beyond capable of more, but regardless, 4 steals on just an average day, that's beyond incredible.
I know it's super rare to have a player get 10 steals at any level of basketball, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hawaii Rongi had a game this year where she had 10 steals.
Hits that mark. I wouldn't be surprised either.
So moving on to some tip-off talk here. Upcoming games for the men's team. They'll play at USUE on Thursday, January 9th at 7 p.m. It'll be right after the women's game that day at 5 p.m. and the third conference game and the third straight road game to start conference play for the men's team. And USUE had just beat Colorado Northwestern at Colorado Northwestern, and so there's kind of a little comparison there. That was a closer game as well, and so the Badgers and the Eagles have had a little bit of a close call with the Spartans, and now they'll face off against each other. This game will be at Utah State Eastern. Yeah,
and I think it's going to be a really fun game to watch. I think that the thing that's going to rule in favor of the Badgers is, it's still an in-state game, so you won't have to travel as far.
Yeah, less than 2 hours away, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, exactly. So I think that for the Badgers, they're really going to have to focus on not letting the road really fatigue them throughout that, make sure that they're getting enough shots done in the warm-up to make sure that they're well adapted to the hoops over there at Utah State Eastern. So I think it's going to be a really good game, the whole time. I'm expecting both teams to come out with a fight.
Yeah, and especially with returning players from last year's team. Because that would be Ford, Mark Brown Jr., both Isaac Garrett, Isaac Finlinson, and then obviously Coach May and the coaching staff. Because last year, Utah State Eastern came here and we blew them out by 45, I think. Yeah. And then Snow goes to Utah State Eastern and loses by 30 plus.
Yeah. And
so I think Coach May and his returning players are going to be looking for blood over there in Utah State Eastern this week.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, vengeance, it runs, like, you always have that mental side of you that's like, all right, I got to beat this team. And I think that's exactly what those returning players and Coach Andrew May is going to go with, that mentality that we got to beat this team. Otherwise, it's just going to, like, take a toll on them throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, 100%. And I haven't watched the Utah State Eastern game yet, but I do know they don't have Martell Williams this year, who was a top 5 to top 10 scorer in the country in JUCO last year. We watched him play here. We got to call a couple of his games here early in the year when they played Green River, and he hit the buzzer beater from half court to win. Phenomenal player. Utah State Eastern doesn't have him this year, and I think that will play a lot more to our benefit.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely takes away a workload that Mark Brown Jr. had to go through a majority of the matchups. He went against Martell Williams. Obviously, that's going to relieve him a little bit from that. So I think Mark Brown Jr., he's going to have a much easier time in this game, both sides of the court defending and being a play caller up on the front court for the Badgers. I think he's going to have a much easier time trying to figure out what he wants from this team and what he's going to see.
Yeah, and I think the whole team will have an easier time on Saturday when they go to Central Wyoming. Snow's already played Central Wyoming twice this year. Both of them were double-digit blowouts, weren't really close games. One of them was at Central Wyoming. The other one was here at Snow. Both of them weren't close, and I expect this one to be the same.
I mean, yeah, as much as I hate to say it, I'm sure Central Wyoming, they have talented players. They got the talent that they need, but I think they just really got to make the pieces work. And meanwhile, it's basically the pure opposite for the Badgers. They've figured out what they have, and all the pieces are working right now. They're clicking. Over 100 points in both those games, if I'm not mistaken, for the Badgers.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm expecting the same thing as well.
Yeah, and then so that Central Wyoming game will be Saturday, January 11th at 2 p.m. And I already mentioned that the women will play at Utah State Eastern at 5 p.m. right before the men do on January 9th, and then they won't have a game Saturday because since Snow isn't playing, the men's team isn't playing a conference game Saturday, the women won't be either. The only difference is the men have scheduled a game, the women haven't.
Yeah.
So our women's team will play a 9-7 overall Utah State Eastern team who we saw play here earlier this year. They have some good players that returned from last year, and they're 1-1 in conference as well as Snow.
Yeah, and when you talk about returning players for Utah State Eastern, the first that comes to my mind is Ellie Esplin.
Yep.
Obviously, she's a dynamic point guard, so I think that in terms of the players that they have to prepare for, she's going to be top of the list, no doubt. Ellie Esplin, dynamic player, plays very well at the Horn Activity Center as well.
Yep.
She had a lot of great games last year at the Horn Activity Center, so she's definitely going to be a handful at the top of the list for top threats for the Badgers.
I 100% agree. Utah State Eastern women's team averaging 67.3 points per game, and they're shooting 41% from the field. So they look like a little bit of a load on offense.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, with the threats that the Badgers have, obviously you have Brooke Pennington. You have a three-headed monster at point guard with Pennington, Elliott, and Richens coming into her own the way she has. And then you also have a low-post threat in Ayana Bay. So I'm expecting those point guards to be moving the ball very fast, and I'm expecting the players in the paint to really step up when they need to.
You mentioned Ayana Bay, who's been starting at center for Coach Zoo, and I want to shout out her backup when Bay goes and gets a breather. Sydney Smith, the freshman, 5'10" or 5'11", I don't remember. She's come on and really taken on that role and performed really well so far this year. I've been thoroughly impressed with Sydney Smith.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, she brings a very big defensive presence, I think. It's very an underrated asset of her game, you know. She does play clean, thankfully, and you don't want your players to get in foul trouble regardless of where they are on your depth chart. You don't want foul trouble. I think Sydney Smith has really cleaned it up in the recent games in terms of her fouls, and in terms of offensively, she's been very dynamic from the free throw line. I think she hit 6 for 6, if you told me earlier.
She went 5 for 6 against Colorado Northwestern on Saturday, and all 6 of them, I believe, came in the first half. 4 of them in the first quarter, and the other 2 in the second quarter. At a moment where Snow's offense was starting to stall a little bit when the game was still close.
Yeah, and the one thing that tells me about that is that she is the clutch player when it comes to those free throws, with those, regardless of where they are in the game. But obviously in the crunch time, I think those free throws are going to be big, especially if Ayana Bay, this is a big if Ayana Bay were to get into foul trouble or foul out of the game, it's good to know that she has a reliable backup.
Yeah, and Sydney Smith also able to stretch the floor a little bit out to that 15, 18 feet area to create a little bit more space on the floor, and Coach Zoo likes to play a lot of that one in, four out style of offense that really
Yeah.
fits with both Bay and Smith.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that another thing that's really going to work for the Badgers going into this is obviously Kiriana Hawakarangi. Obviously she's a dynamic defensive playmaker, and the thing about her play that I really like is that she kind of plays everywhere on defense.
Yeah.
I've seen her play in the perimeter. I've seen her play in the paint as well, and that's why I think she fits so well with the players like Smith and Ayanna Bay, because you can go into a 3-2 zone, have Hawakarangi be the second in the low paint, and have three more out on the perimeter, and the reliable players like Richens, Elliott, and Pennington who have that speed and agility, and then you have Hawakarangi locking down anybody that goes towards the paint with her and Bay or Smith.
Yeah, I completely agree. So that will do it for us here on Inside Badger Hoops. 2 games for the men's coming up this week. 1 for the women at Utah State Eastern is the only conference game for both the men's and women. So that's January 9th, 5 p.m. for the women, 7 p.m. for the men. We'll be back here next Tuesday. We'll recap these games we've previewed. We'll preview the next upcoming games, and those ones that we'll preview next week will be home games. So really excited for our conference home opener in the Horn Activity Center, which is a really tough gym to play in.
Definitely.
So thank you very much for watching. Have a good night, afternoon, morning, whatever it is. See ya.